All right, everyone. So let's talk about a very interesting yet strange phenomena that exists only on the internet, and that is people who LARP as medieval knights or people who romanticize medieval knights, and they talk about the revival of Christendom. Now, I used to be, and it pains me to say this. It pains me to say this. It's not easy for me to say this, okay? But I used to be someone who wrote a lot about the Middle Ages, and I used to romanticize the Middle Ages, and I used to have this idea that Christendom will revive itself. Now, the only way that Christendom could ever revive itself is if you have a miracle. And, well, I'm not going to make any sort of prediction about miracles. But what I will say is that on this earth, in the current state that we are in, we will never see the revival of Christendom. Christendom has been dead since the late 18th century. And it was gradually dying for centuries before that. You can just go back to the 30 Years' War and you will see one of the great episodes of the death of Christendom. So let's talk about this phenomena of people who fantasize about Christendom. We will look to certain people, certain groups, I should say, certain movements that will carry up a cross, and they'll talk about how they're Catholic or how they're Christian or how they're Orthodox or something like that, and how they are fighting against Islam or the left or liberals or whatever, SJWs. And we will look to these people and say, you see, right here, guys, the revival of Christendom, Catholics are rising up, Christians are rising up. But we would be wrong to have such ideas. We would be greatly mistaken to have such perceptions on such things. Because with images, we are easily deceived. With images, we are easily deceived. Even St. Paul, he talks a little bit about, well, he talks a lot about deception, but he talks about something similar to this. He says, I believe he tells the Galatians in one letter, he says, you are following another Christ. And it's really remarkable that he uses this terminology. He says, you are following another Christ. So you are following your perception of Christ. You think you're following Christ, but you're not. You're following a false Christ. And so you can see a group of people and they're holding up the crucifix or they're holding up the cross. And you may think, oh, look, they're holding up the cross. They must be great Christian warriors or whatever. But the reality is that you are following people who are uplifting a false cross, a forged cross, a fake cross, a cross that does not represent the true Christ, but a false Christ. You are following a cross that represents an Antichrist. It's like that story in the Old Testament where Moses has this image of a snake. And he says, whoever stares at it will be healed. And, some generations later, the Jews, the Israelites, are found, they are discovered to be worshiping this very image. Well, and they had, I'm sure they had the argument and said, well, the snake healed our ancestors. And, well, but you're not following the authentic meaning of that image. So you can have people who uplift the cross, and it seems very authentic, it seems very legitimate, but it's not. You can follow people who uplift a cross, but the reality is that they are fascist. You can revere people or follow people who uplift the cross, but the reality would be that these people are Nazis. or these people are communist. Maybe they're part of some sort of liberation theology, communistic cult. These things do very much so exist. Let's talk about a real example. Let's talk about a real example. They are people on the internet who love to revere Vlad Tepes. And if you don't know who Vlad Tepes is, well, look up Vlad the Impaler. Everyone has heard of Vlad the Impaler, but no one has, well, not a lot of people have heard of Vlad Tepes. And if you revere Vlad the Impaler, but you don't know who Vlad Tepes is, then you are revering Vlad the Impaler in ignorance and stupidity. Because those who know about Vlad the Impaler they know that his real name was Vlad Tepes. And if you look up Vlad Tepes, you will find out, well, he wasn't this righteous person. And it just sickens me that people would even revere someone with the title of the Impaler. Like, that to me is sickening. Like, this person impaled people. That's pretty sick. That's satanic. Now, I'll give you guys a real life example from within recent decades of how destructive this sort of ideology can be. There was a guy by the name of Pierre Gemayel. Pierre Gemayel was a Maronite Lebanese Catholic. Catholics in Lebanon are known as Maronites. Okay, Maronites are one of the orders of Eastern Catholicism, and they've been around for a long time. Now, Pierre Gemayel, he got inspiration for his fascist movement when he went to Germany. He was the head of the Lebanese Soccer Federation. He went to Berlin to participate in the Olympics. And at that time, Berlin, well, it was under the fascists. It was under the Nazis. And he saw the Nazis. He saw the brown shirts. And he liked what he saw. He was sort of magnetized towards their fixation on order and justice. And he said, you know, we need this in the Middle East. So Pierre Gemayel went back to Lebanon and he started the Kataib Party, the fascist party. Really, these people were Lebanese Nazis. And they had an emphasis on the Lebanese race, not as one of the members of the Arab peoples, but as Phoenicians. We are ethnic Phoenicians. And so he revered the Phoenician race just like the Germans revered the Aryan race. So there was a civil war that broke out in Lebanon in the 1970s. You had the Palestinians and the Maronites killing each other. You also had the Druze attacking the Maronites, and it was an extremely bloody mess. The Syrians were involved, and the Israelis were involved as well. Well, the Israelis, they saw how the Lebanese fascist, or the Phalangist, they saw how the Lebanese Maronite fascist were slaughtering the Palestinians, and they said, you know, we can use these people to get rid of our enemies, right? In this case, the enemy is the Palestinians. So, so the Israelis trained the Phalangists, they armed the Phalangists, and they used the Phalangists to fight against the Palestinians. Now, I'm not saying that the Palestinians were great people. The Palestinians did some pretty terrible stuff to the Lebanese population before that. But what I'm about to describe to you guys was not justified. It was not justifiable. So the Israelis managed to get the Palestinians, all of the Palestinian men, out of two refugee camps. It was Shabra and Shatila. And so the Palestinian men were gone from these refugee camps, and all that was left in these two camps were women and children. And the Phalange, the Lebanese fascist, went into the two camps and slaughtered 1,700 people, or around that number. Some people debate the numbers, but right now I'm reading this book. It's called Pity the Nation by Robert Fisk. This is a big-ass book, but I must say, it is beautifully written. Like, I'm reading this book, and I'm telling myself, like, this is how history should be written. It is a beautifully written book. The prose is done in a very articulate, very almost poetic fashion. It's very, very nice to read, and it makes it very easy to read and very easy to absorb the information. But Robert Fisk, who actually interviewed Pierre Gemayel, he says that in a matter of 3 days, in a duration of 3 days, 1,700 Palestinians, men, women and children, not men, women and children, were butchered in just 3 days by these Nazis, these Lebanese Nazis. That's pretty horrendous. Imagine killing 1,700 people in just 3 days. That's pretty damn horrific. Now, these fascists, these phalangists, these were people who held up the cross. These were people who claimed inspiration from the Crusaders and from Christendom. And you can see video footage of these Lebanese fascists carrying up the crucifix, carrying up the cross. Yet they committed such an act of evil. And you see, and this is how great the deception is. You can sit here and say, well, these people are great Christians and they're fighting against this and that. But you have to look at their ideology. You have to look at what these people really believe in. And if you look at the ideology of the Lebanese Phalange, what you will find is an obsession, a fixation with ethnicity, an obsession with race. And it's just like what Pope Pius XI said, and Eugenio Pacelli, exactly what they said. Whoever has a fixation on race is Antichrist. And so when you see the Phalange holding up that cross, and you think, oh, they're great Christians, but they have an obsession with race. And what does that mean? It's not the cross of Christ that they're holding. It's the cross of Antichrist. So be very wary of what's going to come up in the future, because what could come up in the future is a very diabolical movement that consists of ethno-nationalism, that consists of racism, that consists of eugenics, but at the same time holds up the cross. And you're going to think, wow, these people are Christians. Look, they're holding up the cross. When in reality, these people would be Antichrist. Anyway, hope you guys have learned something from this message. Hope you guys have enjoyed this message. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.